90% of what we believe to be true in the emerging literature will one day be proven to be incorrect. So just get used to like being wrong.
Hydroviv. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, founder and podcast producer at Max Podcasting, and you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 24 times 10, 240. Quick math. And today's guest is Eric Roy. Eric is the founder and chief scientist of Hydroviv, the water filter that is customized to your home's water. Super cool product, super cool story, even cooler because when we recorded this, there was snow in Maine, and Eric talks about Antarctica, so super duper cool. In this episode, we also talk about the intersection between science and entrepreneurship and why more scientists should become entrepreneurs, using the scientific method to build your business, getting used to failure, building out your team, and the most interesting things you can learn to do during a rain delay or the gap between a doubleheader in a baseball game. It is Roy, Eric Roy. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Eric Roy, the artist formerly known as Eric Waugh, founder and chief scientist at Hydroviv, which is really, really cool product and since been acquired, and just awesome story all around. Eric, so excited to talk to you on many fronts today. How you doing today? Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Max. Everything's good. We just got some snow up in Maine, so it's fluffy. It's fluffy and fun. The dogs will be psyched.
Fluffy and fun. What? That's the way to live right there. Fluffy
Yep.
and fun. How do you keep warm when you're surrounded by a snow globe?
Oh, my blood's from here, so this is comfortable. Like you plot me in like a Houston summer, and I am sweating uncontrollably. So I'll take winter any day.
Very cool. Very literally cool.
Yeah.
But excited to get into the Hydroviv story. But before that, I was looking at your background, and for your PhD, you studied sensor science, engineering, and informatics, as well as oceanography, which, I mean, same. But like, how, what is sensor science engineering?
Yeah. So basically, I got this National Science Foundation fellowship that was an interdisciplinary thing. So sensor science, engineering, and informatics is basically, okay, you can either build sensors or, do applied math, what they're kind of calling data science now, or, you just engineer new materials, and they want to kind of blend those things, bring those fields together and make useful products. And fortunately, that's worked out for me. That forcing me to think about all of those different areas has served me pretty well.
Did you always have an interest in the science space?
Oh yeah, total nerd. Hands down, math, science nerd.
What is it that had you gravitate? I never know if it's you're gravitated to or it gravitates to you. But what is it that excited you about science and math and the engineer space in the first place?
It's a good question. I don't really know. It's just something that's kind of made sense to me. And when things make sense, that's something that, or at least the ability to pursue something making sense is something that has always interested me. So it's like, I guess like I liked puzzles when I was a child, and this is kind of like adult puzzles, basically. So I think there's probably a linear progression there.
Definitely, and these are, I mean, the problems you're tackling are huge, massive, very difficult and abstract puzzles. So that's
Yeah.
it's good you have that energy to that space.
Well, as you kind of alluded to, the problems that I work on are kind of self-motivating, so they are important. We're not talking about selling sugar drinks to kids here. We're talking about some pretty big stuff, so it's easy to get motivated.
How about on the oceanography standpoint? How did that play into things?
So it was super sweet. So I did an undergrad in chemistry at a school called Colby College up in Maine, and I was looking at PhD programs, and I was talking to some very very big chemistry departments And then basically, this professor at UMaine was in oceanography, and he's like, "Yeah, I mean, if you come to UMaine in 2 years, you can go get a master's degree in 2 years. I'll take you to Antarctica." And I'm like, "Say nothing more." So, sold. Let's do that.
Sold.
I
Yeah.
ended up sticking around for a doctorate there because I was able to, within the confines of the oceanography department, I was really able to get into that interdisciplinary fellowship. So basically, the sensors that I made in that sensor science engineering informatics, I just use them in the ocean. So that was kind of like how I like checked the oceanography box, but I'm a chemist, like for sure.
Have the quickest pronunciation of sensor science engineering and informatics I've ever heard. Well deserved.
Yeah, I
But
practiced.
and it's a good thing that you're comfortable with the cold because Antarctica, I think it's one of the things that's really fascinating to a lot of people, but there's probably a lot of people that wouldn't want to go there just because it is so freezing cold. But I mean, it's the thought of being somewhere that is so remote is definitely intriguing. How was your experience in
The
Antarctica?
thing that's super weird about Antarctica wasn't the cold for me because I was down there in Antarctic summer, right? So, it was kind of in the 20s and
Oh, so it's like
30s,
80 degrees and sunny? No.
like 25, 30 degrees out, which is like Maine spring, right? So it wasn't that bad. The thing that's super weird though is that it's light out 24 hours a day. And like because of the ozone hole, you could actually get a sunburn through your tent. So like when you were out in the
Oh, wow.
field, you'd put on sunscreen on your face because I did my field work in a place where there was no snow shelters or anything. So we were in tents if we were overnighting, and yeah, you had to like think about those things, which is weird.
Oh my god. Yeah, so what's the best way to not get sunburn in Antarctica?
Sunscreen and clothes. Fortunately, you're wearing clothes, so like all you really need to worry about is kind of your face. So yeah, just sunscreen, like check with your friends. It's all good. Yeah.
And what was your favorite part overall about Antarctica?
Had nothing to do with the science. So somehow my PhD advisor got the keys to like all of the historical huts that like Scott and Shackleton and those guys did. And we just did a snowmobile tour where we got into the huts, into the historic huts, and then we ended the day going to a penguin rookery. So it was, I mean, kind of one of these things like there's no amount of money you can buy that experience on. And my PhD advisor just somehow like came up with it. And he's like, "Hey, let's go do this." And I'm like, "Seriously? Like, let's totally do that." So we took a day off and banged that out. It was pretty special.
That sounds awesome. Worth the flight. Or well, actually, did you fly or did you take a boat there?
Yeah, so we flew. So I flew out of Christchurch. And basically, the way that it works is so I believe it's like the New Zealand Air Force. So you fly from, or I flew from Christchurch, New Zealand to McMurdo Station. And basically, the way that it works is you take off in this C-130, which is a kind of old school military, like it's called a Herc, and you have enough fuel to either land or turn around at the halfway point. And so basically, at the midway point, the pilot has to say, "Okay, are we going to land or are we going back to Christchurch?" And it took us 4 attempts to actually make it to Antarctica. So in New Zealand in the summer, it's like 80 degrees and you're wearing the Antarctica extreme cold weather gear, right? So you're just bundled up in like the warmest clothes on earth, walking on an 80-degree runway, and just you're like praying for takeoff so you can at least get out of the heat. And then we had to land 4 times and then just wearing the sweat drenched clothes, just like give it another whirl the next day. So 4 days in a row. You don't get your bags back, it's not Delta, right? So like your bags remain in cargo. But yeah, you land on a nice runway. Like it's yeah, there's no pavement. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. But you're dealing with professionals at that point.
Fourth time's a charm. That is, I mean, flying can be a stressful thing for so many people, or a nerve wracking thing for so many people. Just like standard commercial flights. How how do you get to yourself? How do you get yourself to stay calm when it's like multiple attempts and you're taking off and landing on ice?
I mean, there's like if you go in the ocean, there's really nothing that's like there's the outcome is pretty clear, right? So you just kind of do it. And it was a little bit of a hairy landing because the wind can change very rapidly. But again, this is what these pilots do, right? It's like, oh yeah, we our specialty is taking off and landing planes in Antarctica. So it's kind of like, all right, cool. And it was the same thing because when I was down doing field work on ice, we actually had daily helicopter trips out to our field location. And these are all like former special forces folks and oil rig operators because they're flying helicopters in conditions that like your helicopter tour person would not fly in, right? But they got to get you in and they got to get you out. So, you're dealing with these elite people, which is a good thing when you're in the air, right? Like, because there's very little margin for error there.
So let's get from the cool temperatures of Maine and Antarctica to the cool story of Hydroviv. So awesome. I mean, we've talked about that you have a great background in science and chemistry and always had an interest in solving problems. But you've there's some big hairy problems that you're tackling with this one. How did this idea for a really cool new optimized water filter first come to you?
Well, the thing that's strange about it is this was never really supposed to be a company. This was a side project. So speaking, at the time when Hydroviv kind of came about, I had a full-time job. I was working for a tech company. I was running product development for a tech company that was building devices for firefighters and first responders and military people to like detect explosives and kind of some other nasty stuff, right? So another big problem. So Hydroviv was this side project that really kind of got legs with the Flint like lead stuff that took place in 2015, right? And just as in case some of your audience isn't aware of it, basically the city goofed their water treatment plant, and as a result, there was a ton of lead released into the water citywide in Flint, like levels that are really high. And what I recognize is like most of the water filters that are commercially available, if you look at like the concentration of lead that they're rated to handle, and you look at the concentrations of lead that were literally being measured in Flint, you're like, Flint is way higher than those levels. So how do you solve for that, right? So that was kind of the engineering jumping off point that led to kind of the design to be like, okay, well, let's make a water filter that's outside the bounds of the engineering spec of the stuff that you can buy at Home Depot. And that was really the jumping off point. Now, this wasn't something we sold. When I say we, I mean me. So basically what ended up happening was I was reaching out to daycares and stuff like that in Flint saying, "Hey, if I build you this high capacity lead filter and ship it to you for free, would you hook it up?" And if they said yes, like I would, buy the parts, build it, and kind of go with it. But yeah, it was not really a company. It was more of a charitable thing. And then fast forward a couple months, I ran out of money because, when you're not selling something, you run out of money real quick. And I was really walking around. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time and walking around and, selling these things door to door, and kind of was like the Tom's shoe model of like, oh, if you buy a water filter, you get to donate one to Flint. And what I learned very quickly is no one who lives in Washington, D.C. is actually from Washington, D.C., right? And or a good number are not. And they're like, "Oh, that's really cool. So you're going to make a Washington D.C. specific water filter." And I was kind of like, "Indeed." And they're like, "Okay, well, could you make one, I have my family's in Chicago. Could you make one that's like specific for Chicago's water?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, I suppose I could do that." And after I heard that enough times, it's like, "Oh, like duh, like let's do that. That seems like a really good idea." So that's literally the kind of the linear progression that led to Hydroviv.
How do you optimize for different cities or I guess different waters like that?
The way to think about this is there's different types of what's called filtration media, and they all do different jobs, right? You can think of them as different ingredients. Flour makes kind of a bread structure, sugar makes stuff sweet. The same kind of concept applies to water filters. There's certain types of ingredients that remove things like lead. There's other types of ingredients that remove chlorine, chloramine, chromium 6. And basically, by mixing those different ingredients in the right ratio, you can create water filters that are actually matched to your customer's water. And, that's different than what other water filter companies do. Because what other water filter companies do is they just kind of say, we'll kind of take a general approach here and mix something that works okay for a lot of places or works not super well for everywhere. and then they sell that to everyone in the big box stores. So I saw that as an opportunity to kind of sell these things on the internet where you can actually, where your customer is, right? Because you know where you're shipping it. So you could build the water filter according to their water quality.
Oh wow, I'm learning a lot about chemistry and ratios and all sorts of different things. But I love that there's a really powerful mission and kind of purpose behind why you started this in the first place. Obviously, anyone who's familiar with the Flint water crisis, like terrible, terrible times.
No, it's horrible.
And unfortunately, it's like we're seeing it still happen in different places. Just awful problem, and it's really cool that you created something that's a solution for that. And then somebody gave you like the real feedback of like, hey, can you do this for us somewhere else?
I personally installed our first 500 water filters in Washington,
Oh wow.
D.C. So basically, it was this idea. It was like I look at what I charged for that at the time, and I'm just like, this was so not worth my time from a financial standpoint. But the ability to spend a half hour in the kitchen with 500 customers ended up being super valuable because like if you're under someone's sink, they're in the kitchen watching you, right? Like they're making sure you're not doing something
Right.
weird, right? So but just using
They
that
might pull out
opportunity.
a lawn chair and a pina colada and watch.
There was alcohol consumed by customers for sure during the day. I'm just kind of like, it's 11 in the morning, but it's, you do you.
What are some of the most valuable things you learned from those? It's almost like you did ethnographies there, like detailed interviews with the guests. I mean, with the guests. So yeah, you can tell them podcast. So,
Right.
with the customers and those first installations.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where understanding what's interesting to you is not necessarily what's interesting to your customers, right? So I'm a chemist, so I thought like the tech and the chemistry and all this other stuff would excite people as much as it did me. I was wrong. You could just watch their eyes glaze over in real time, right? So like talk about immediate feedback, right? But then that's when you learn about like the benefit that you provide them. And what you learn by that isn't what you're selling is like the technology. What you're selling them is the relief that they feel when they no longer have to worry about the problem. The other thing I learned about that is this actually, once you understand that, it actually places a great deal of responsibility on the company. Because if you don't deliver on what they want, especially in a technical field like chemistry, they may not know, but they may still feel that relief. So it actually like also, I would say, elevated the responsibility that I felt to deliver a high quality and high performing product because the reality of the situation is like once someone spends a couple $100 on a water filter, they're probably not going to spend a couple $1,000s to test its efficacy. So that's something where it's like, okay, we're actually talking about we're talking about the water that goes in someone's mouth, and you're really making a performance promise to them. So that was something that stuck, that left a dent for sure.
How does it work? That I mean, this whole interview could just be how does it work
Right.
because we have a certain non-chemist interviewing a definite chemist.
Right.
So how does it work? Like, I mean, a super simple example. So let's just say like, yeah, you're installing a Hydroviv in Chicago, in LA, and in Austin, Texas. How does it work that your product like optimizes the ratio?
100%. So here's the deal. So we do this, like we actually put human beings to work on this process. So let's say you're living in Austin, Texas, for example. You place an order on our website. What literally happens is we have an analyst that looks at the shipping address, knows that you're in Austin, and starts researching Austin's water quality. So we have databases that we own, we have databases that are publicly available. Like there's research by a human being that goes into this process. And that's really, really important because you can see historical trends, you can see all this stuff if you know what you're looking for. Then once we understand those problems that exist in the customer's water, then we can start to formulate. We have some proprietary stuff that lives behind the scenes that helps us do that recipe making that best matches the customer's water. And we can do that at scale so we can keep our costs low and we can sell direct to the customer at a price that's not completely bonkers, right? So that's really how it works. It's a human being that does the initial research, and then we have some logic and decision framework that does the actual formulation.
So there's human beings that are helping out with a lot of this process, but it's not just you. Whereas at the start where it was like all just you and you're like, I mean, I'm sure you're still hands on, but like it's not like you're going and doing all these installations around, US
Oh no,
now.
we've grown since then. No, Hydroviv used
Yeah,
so I mean
exactly.
this let's keep in mind in Washington DC this was in a studio apartment. So the manufacturing floor was my kitchen table, the warehouse was under the kitchen table, and tech support was the laptop that was also on the kitchen table, right? Like that was the entirety of the thing. I mean technically on paper I started Hydroviv in 2015. I didn't hire our first employee until 2018. Like this was very very much a side project for a while. But, once we kind of hit that, we, started to get some traction and we grew very quickly. So yeah, there are human beings that wake up every single day at Hydroviv looking to do nothing more than just analyze the water quality of new orders that are coming in. They wake up every day and that's what they get excited to do. Yeah.
How did you go about, transitioning from that kind of like, oh, I need to do everything myself to like, all right, we're much better as a company if other people are helping out here.
It's really hard. So the thing I tell entrepreneurs is if you're bootstrapping, the hardest thing to do is hire your first employee. There are consequences of hiring the wrong person, and how you train that individual actually determines whether or not it's a worthwhile hire. So in our case, it was this really funny story where it was actually a customer's son who was like, I get an email from the customer saying, "Hey, my son is looking to get into water filtration, potentially start a company. Maybe you guys should talk." And I'm just like, why would I ever talk to a competitor? And, without going through the details, basically it became abundantly clear that I needed to hire this individual. His name's Matt. He's still at the company.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Max. I was like, wait,
No,
is
not
this me?
Max. No, it
No.
was Matt. So Matt's still at the company. He's my product manager, and he's been with me. He was employee number one. Matt reported on day one of his job to my studio apartment and worked on my kitchen table. Yep.
Oh my God.
Yep. And then we had an intern as well that started
I
the
got
same day.
chills. I love the stories like that of just like teaming up in an apartment and just make, let's make a business. Why not?
Yeah, let's take on billion-dollar companies. Like it's a weird blend of like arrogance and motivation. It's like, yeah, we're totally going to take on these giant multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, but worked out.
If you look at your site now, there's different filters you have. There's additional ones. You have your typical water filters, but also you have stuff that impacts, like shower water. You have different kind of parts of the household there. What did it look like coming up with these, line extensions or different products?
So this is not a very exciting answer.
I'm actually really excited because you said it that way.
So the refrigerator filter is identical to the under sink water filter, except has different connectors, because the tube that goes into your refrigerator is different than the tube that goes into the faucet. That's the only difference. It's this same housing, same cartridge, same plastic, same literally everything. The shower filter is a different animal. So the shower filter, if you think about what you're asking a shower filter to do, is you're asking it, you're not going to drink the water, right? You want to prioritize the level of filtration that goes into treating the water that goes into your mouth is different than the water that's going into your skin. Because if you think about it, a shower, you need to treat, like, depending on how long of a shower you're taking, like gallons of water per usage, right? So there's always trade-offs because it's like fast flow rates, super high volumes. So what you focus on are the things that you can address. Fortunately, with showers, the chemicals that you want to remove are actually removable at that flow rate and at that volume. It's the things that irritate your skin. It's the things that make your water stink, right? So fortunately, it is a different filtration technology, but it's an addressable filtration technology because the requirements required to filter shower water actually end up being doable, which is great. So you can make a product that you're willing to put your name on. There's other filtration applications where people make claims that are not exactly backed by performance, and I don't want to say resisted the urge, because there was really no urge. It was just like, on principle, we didn't go down that path and we left money on the table.
But you did put together a pretty good deal. So, flash forward, whatever you prefer, and you've been acquired. So you're part of Culligan International. Really, really cool partnership there. When you look back, what are some of the key inflection points in the life of the business that got you to the point of even being, acquirable, if that's a word?
No, that's a really, I mean, I like the word. Whether it's a word or not, I like it. It's descriptive and precise, so I like it.
It's acquirable in itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm into it. If you're going to make a business that is acquirable, to use your term, Max, you need to think
Oh,
about the potential.
trademark that right away.
I love it. Um, you need to think about the potential acquirers as a customer. So you have to, even if you're completely loyal to the person that's using your product, what I would say is you want to measure the things that are important to someone who might acquire you down the road. So in our case, in the direct to consumer world, those are things like what is your customer acquisition cost? What is your customer lifetime value and things like that. But that's something that didn't come till much later. Before that, we're just kind of like, well, step number one is, are we an actual company? Because again, when I hired that first individual full time, that was actually the first time when if you called Hydroviv's phone number, like someone picked up, right? So that's a decision in and of itself because you're taking on employees and there's responsibilities and stuff. I would say the second big thing was for us anyway, applying to go on Shark Tank. That was something that was really important for us. And maybe not in the way that you think, right? I think people think that when you air on Shark Tank, like money just like, it's like A, you walk off stage with a duffel bag full of cash, and then B, like money just comes from the vents for like the next little bit. That's not
Yeah,
entirely true.
it's like robbing a casino. It's like Ocean's 11. It's perfect.
Right, exactly. Just money just everywhere. It's ridiculous. That's simply not true. However, what it does is it really forces you to think about how to communicate your deal. Like what is your offer? I'm a scientist, right? I spent some time in technical sales, but how do you sell to everyday people? How do you frame your product for everyone? Like who is your customer? Well, it's not like at first, if you had asked me this in 2015, it's like, oh, it's totally going to be like the nerds that are really into this stuff. It's not that at all. A Hydroviv customer is a customer that just wants an effective solution with very little friction. Like they're not the weekend warrior that gets pleasure out of sitting under their sink for 3 hours installing something. It's someone that wants a 15-minute solution. So that was huge for our business. The other thing that was a really big choice for us in the e-commerce space, for us personally, the decision not to sell on Amazon. We could have inflated our top line numbers by being on Amazon. It's obviously a huge marketplace, but the thing to remember about our business is it's a lifetime value business. So you're going to buy our filter and you're going to buy replacement cartridges because they're consumable. That's important both from a business model perspective, because the recurring revenue is something that obviously helps a business. It's also really important from a product perspective because it ensures that your product works. And if we were to sell a water filter on Amazon, we don't know who that customer is. So, how do we let them know that they actually need to service their product by changing out the cartridge? That ended up being really, really big for us. And that ended up being why companies wanted to acquire us, even though we didn't know it at the time. At the time we made the decision, that wasn't like, oh, well, we'll get bought, so we need to do this. It ended up being something that the actual value that we saw in it, which was maintaining that relationship with our customer, ended up being the thing that people really valued from an acquisition case.
If you are looking to acquire a new newsletter for your inbox that you actually enjoy reading, and it's not actually acquiring it, it's subscribing to it, consider signing up for Podcasting to the Max. It is a fun, quirky, corny, weird email from me every Thursday that includes podcasting tips, it includes entrepreneurship tips, and some of the worst dad jokes you've ever heard. You can sign up at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. Now, let's put the term scientist and entrepreneur in a blender and let it go and go and go and see what happens. Let's switch gears a little bit to a segment on inspiration and creativity. So this is kind of more you on the personal side, kind of how you operate in the business world and beyond. And you can tell from the answers that you've given on this interview that yourself, you're like this beautiful fusion of both a scientist and an entrepreneur. So like there's multiple aspects there, and it's like I'm sure it's very different ways of thinking, but also there's overlap there. So like how do you navigate like your science interests as well as your entrepreneurial interests?
There's more overlap than you may think on the surface. Once you once you understand that science is really just a framework for asking questions and getting answers. So it's a scientific
It's
method.
just like a podcast interview.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Scientific method, right? It's hypothesis, it's
That was my
hypothesis.
hypothesis. Yep.
Exactly, right? That's what it is. And if you think about business, that's exactly what it is. You're in the pursuit of answers that drive your decisions. And when you think about it like that, if you're a good experimentalist scientifically, you're probably going to be a pretty efficient business owner as long as you really focus on what your goals are. For me, I was always working in applied science where we always had a goal of our science and we didn't really get sidetracked by like shiny things and like academic discovery and stuff. We really were focused on a goal, and with business it's the exact same thing. It's like the goal, you identify kind of the decisions that you need to make to get to that goal, and then you start asking yourself, what information do I need to make those decisions? And that's just hypothesis testing. So it's the same thing. I think it might annoy my employees at the time on some level, because that's kind of what I keep going back to is the scientific method. I'm like, do we know this to be true, or do we believe this to be true? If we believe it to be true, how would we test so we can move from belief to knowledge? And there's work involved in doing that, right? There's work, and there's oftentimes like humble pie, because maybe the thing you thought is true is not actually true. But like, again, science is the discovery of truth. And in business, I think that if you're doing an ethical business that is providing real value to people, and you're not just playing like hot potato with like garbage, right? It's not like, oh, it's your problem now. Like, if you're doing real stuff, you're in the pursuit of truth. So there's a ton of overlap between science and entrepreneurship. I think more scientists should be entrepreneurs. I'm actually speaking to my alma mater's board of trustees about this, going down to Boston for that.
Well, I like any sort of pie, so humble pie is totally cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really, really good point. There's a lot from the scientific method that can translate over. What else from the science world would you say comes in handy if you're looking to build a business?
That's a really good question, and I don't want this to sound rude or negative, but like failure. If you think about
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like if you think about science, you're usually wrong like a lot. Like your hypothesis is usually wrong, so you get really, really used to being wrong. My PhD advisor always used to tell me 90% of what we believe to be true in the emerging literature will one day be proven to be incorrect. So just get used to like being wrong. And in business, it's the exact same thing. It's like, oh, this is going to be a really great idea. An example of that is I thought, hey, why don't I sell these things at farmers markets? That was just such a catastrophically dumb idea, right? But like, you're not going to know until you try it, but you'll find out. So yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, it's getting used to failure, and that's okay. Like, it stings in the moment, but it's like, okay, just like take a step back, get an ice cream, and okay, what's the next thing you're going to fail on? It's really a mentality thing.
Are you ever able to unplug from one being a scientist and two being an entrepreneur in your free time?
No. Because if you think if you think about it, like most of my good ideas that I've had, or most ideas, good and bad, kind of come when I'm doing things where my mind is wandering. So like exercising, walking dogs, riding bikes, whatever. So like where your mind goes when it's idle, that's really kind of what motivates you, right? So if I'm doing anything, like even when I find myself like watching TV or something, I'm not actually like, my face is pointed at the TV, but I'm not actually consuming what's going on.
I would just had the image of you like face the opposite direction and just had on the background. Like, that's an interesting approach.
I think the more representative one is like if I'm watching something on Netflix, and like if you've been watching something on Netflix for so long, it like pops up and it says like, "Are you still watching this?" I've been caught by people that are just like, "What is going on?" You're just like pointing at the TV and that's just like still sitting there, and you're not doing anything, and it weirds people out.
And all of a sudden, that's a very complicated question because you are and you're not watching it at the same time.
Yeah, no, and I've no idea where that time has gone, what was on the TV, and things like that. Like, through the same lens, I'm usually, if I'm driving in a car, like it's usually silent because I'm able to let my mind wander, and that's kind of where it goes. I don't really turn off, but I don't view that as a bad thing 'cause it's fun. It's problem solving, right? I mean, that's the whole like to be able to like operate in a world where you're discovering things and learning things professionally is quite a privilege. So yeah, I enjoy it.
Is there one specific time of the day or activity that you're doing that you tend to get the most problem solved?
No, and as soon as you identify it, you'd want to do it more, which means that the organicness of it and the spontaneity of it would
Oh, that's
completely
true.
go away. So, like, not only do I not know the answer to that question, I am not in the pursuit of of the answer to that question. So, yeah.
Yeah, that almost has like a brings up an addictive nature to it. So yeah, that could get pretty
Well,
tricky.
it's addictive, and it also would denote the switch of science, which is kind of like this discovery process, to engineering, which is like, how do I make more of it? Right. And it's like, I think that the spontaneity, deliberate and spontaneity are kind of two different things. So what's working for me now is working. So I kind of let's keep it how it is.
So let's change how it is and wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A.
All
You
right,
ready
let's
for
do
it?
it. Let's do it.
All right, let's get wild. You mentioned that you loved doing puzzles as a kid. What was your absolute favorite type of puzzle to do?
Ones that were really annoying. So like, when they're all like weird colors and stuff where nothing makes sense because it would be so frustrating. But then if you complete it, it was really, really satisfying, right? So it's like very, very high effort, but then you get that sense of completion. So I'm not a big fan of like the easy attainable stuff. So yeah, that's so yeah.
Not the like three-piece puzzles
Now give me a
for
puzzle that
beginners.
is like just blue, right? Like 500
Oh
pieces in
yeah.
blue, and it's like, yeah, let's do that.
Oh, we that's so funny you brought that up. I interviewed oh, you would this interview's right down your alley actually. I interviewed back in episode I want to say it was 97. Will Shorts, like the puzzle master for the New York Times, the
Oh
crossword puzzle
wow,
guy.
wow.
And fascinating interview, but I asked him about puzzles as well and he mentioned that Heinz Ketchup at the time was like doing this special promotion where they were selling puzzles that were completely red, like the color ketchup, and it was like just solid color. And like my first reaction was like, "Oh my god, that would be extremely difficult and not fun." But that sounds right down your alley.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, like it's weird. It's weird for sure, but like it's really satisfying if you finish it. If you can get to the point of completion, like you've overcome a lot of frustration, which is kind of neat.
What position did you play in baseball?
I was a catcher primarily, and I also pitched some. I was more of a thrower than a pitcher. I could throw real hard, but where it went, there was some uncertainty.
I know the feeling,
Yep.
unfortunately, too well. But you played in college. What's the biggest difference between college and high school baseball?
Time management. So I went to a very demanding academic college, Colby College, up in Waterville, Maine, and academically, you were competing with really, really smart people. And on top of that, you also just kind of have this competitive nature. So just like, how do you get better at the athletic pursuit while pursuing something very, very deep academically? And how do you manage your time in doing that? How do you manage your time and your effort and kind of your energy? That was the big thing. I did not experience that in high school. I know some places do. I did not experience that in high school.
What is a weird talent you have, or like a party trick, something you're really, really good at, but it doesn't really impact what you do for a living?
Well, everything impacts everything for a living, right? Like, so my party trick is I can balance a baseball
Science.
bat. Yeah, I can balance a baseball bat on my nose like a seal. But
Oh,
like to
nice.
say that there's zero social value in that, I think is a stretch. I think people find that hilarious.
Did you learn that in Antarctica?
No, it's between double headers in baseball. You learn how to juggle and just do, you have like that 1 hour between the two games on a Saturday where it's like, okay, well, I ate my sandwich. How about we juggle and, whatever. So that was kind of when that took place,
Oh, that's awesome. That's so much nostalgia there.
which is a little bit counter to the time management thing. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
this
it's
time I
true.
elected to learn how to balance a baseball bat on my nose.
But that happens with rain delays too. That's when you see the guys like stacking hats on their head or like sticking bubble gum in all
Oh,
places you don't even
but the
want to talk
obvious
about. Yeah,
answer, what you do in rain delays, you run the bases and you slide through the puddles, right? I mean, is
yeah.
there any debate on that? Like that's a clear path forward in my mind.
So speaking of clear, so this I don't know if you are able to share this or if it's public information or not. So if not, you can just say, yeah, screw you, Max. But what is a city in the U.S. with like really, really good water quality overall?
It's a good question. So there's two sides of water quality. There's source water, like where do you actually get the water from? And then there's like what comes out of the tap. So if you're looking and you're talking to like a New York City, for example, they talk about the pristineness of their source, but it's a very old city with old infrastructure. So, what comes out of the tap a lot of times can have lead in it if you live in a house that has old plumbing. So it's a little bit of a complicated question. The other thing is there's still a lot that we're discovering about certain chemicals. So I don't want to go on and say, hey, this is great, because there's like these emerging contaminants that as we get a more complete picture of what's going on, we're learning that maybe what we thought was fine is not the case. So I'm not dodging the question. It's more of just like, again, like this discovery in science, like we continue to learn the more complete picture.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I know nothing about water quality, so you could have literally said like, "Oh, you actually like the moon has really good water." No, I'm just
I mean, maybe it does. Like that'd be,
kidding.
I would buy moon
Mars.
water
Yeah.
for sure. Like if you were selling water from the
Moonshine.
moon, I would be a buyer for that. So start that company.
We'll do. We'll get on it right away. Well, Eric, thank you so much, Mr. Roy or Mr. Waugh, as your grandma would say. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all you do. I just really, really cool. The story behind Hydroviv and beyond. And I'm ready to book tickets to Antarctica. So you got me inspired. But where is the best place for people to get some of your Hydroviv products if they're interested, as well as connect with you online?
Yeah, so if you're interested in water filtration, go to hydroviv.com. We have live chat. And if you have any questions, our commitment in live chat is we're going to help you get the right product, even if it's not ours. So work with them. That's their mandate. If you'd like to get in touch with me, there's really two places. One is LinkedIn. If you just search Eric Roy Hydroviv, I'll pop up. The other place is probably Instagram. I don't use Twitter a ton. So my Instagram handle is at Eric Roy PhD.
Perfect. And that's Hydroviv. Hydro as it sounds, and then Viv is VIV. So there's the spelling bee. But last thing here, final thought, stage is yours. It could be a quote, a scientist, words to live by, whatever you want, just kind of words to live by. Send us home here.
The big thing is just if you're working on a problem, just don't stop. Like you're going to encounter stuff, just like level set on that and just persevere, just plow through it. You are guaranteed to fail if you do not do that.
From snow to snow plowing through problems. Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your incredible Hydroviv story and beyond. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. And try out Hydroviv with them. Hydroviv it up. You can also find us on Good Pods, where there are good podcasts and podcast recommendations. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at maxpodcasting.com and sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. That's at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. Until next time, let your business run wild. Bring on the bongos!